I had a call from Peter Beale, who was then head of Fox in the UK and Europe, I think, and he said he'd like me to meet Walter Hill. And I met Walter Hill, David Giler, Gordon Carroll up at Fox in London, in Soho. And they said, would I like to do Alien? And I'd had a script. I thought the script was outstanding because as you read it, you knew it was going to be a good movie, or I thought it was going to be a good movie. And but I'd already signed to do Empire Strikes Back. And so I said, well, I'd love to do it, but it seems to clash with Empire. And Peter Beale said, well, it's another Fox production, I'll organise that. So he talked to Lucas and Gary Kurtz, I think, and I got the okay.
The original concepts of Alien were basically a series of storyboards, very detailed storyboards. Ridley Scott is well known for storyboarding every single scene. We had the special effects storyboards. We also had a whole bunch of paintings done by Ron Cobb, who was the conceptual artist they used for many of the spacecraft. The strange thing was that we never actually followed them because we kept on getting messages which would come from Shepperton, where the main unit was shooting, to Bray Studios, where we were filming the models, about 30 miles away. The drawings and plans that came over seemed to be sort of a conglomeration, as if somebody had taken Ron Cobb's design and they'd altered it. And we obviously found out afterwards that Ridley Scott was having a sort of a say in this and changing things. And actually Nostromo, the main craft in the film, it kind of evolved, and it evolved many times over a period of months and months, over a year in fact it evolved. It originally started out as this basic space tug. We shot on this thing with it actually painted yellow for 6 months, and this was the time when Brian Johnson was involved in the film. However, Brian went off to work on Empire Strikes Back, and we painted the spacecraft grey on Ridley Scott's orders, and then when Ridley Scott finished shooting main unit stuff at Shepperton, came over to Bray Studios, and we basically started from scratch.
Well, the plan was, the great plan, which of course Ridley had no intention of ever adhering to, was that the effects would be shot parallel with the main unit shooting. And Brian Johnson had that rather difficult task of actually doing that. And he shot some very nice stuff, but I know that Ridley knew that he could, in the same way that to jump to another movie, Blade Runner, he already wanted to look through the camera and line those shots up himself, which he did in the end, and it resulted in those incredible sort of city shots. Ridley was determined that he wanted to do them himself. So I think he kind of, consciously or unconsciously, he kind of said, no, that's not quite right, that's a little bit too... I think in fairness, I think the shots were a little bit too colourful sometimes. And Ridley I know you could grade them down, but Rid sort of had these specific ideas, really.
I was asked to organise a cameraman to work with the visual effects crew. That I did, somebody I'd known several years before. I think Ridley kind of had words with the DP. I certainly had words with the DP, Denny Ailing. On the second Saturday of principal photography, Ridley told me he was going over to Bushy on the Saturday and asked that I go along there with them. And we went over there and we saw what Denny was doing for lighting. And I went through a kind of lighting pattern. I felt a bit sorry for Denny because he was trying to achieve something where he couldn't achieve the stop that he wanted based on the lights that he'd got. I think he'd been terrorized by the production office about how much money he'd got to spend on lights, and he really didn't have enough. The risk of getting my own backside kicked, I ordered in a lot of other equipment.
First of all, you get your model right. I mean, you get the model gnarly and aged the way you want, or pristine and clear. You get the shape right, and then you got to walk around it with the lights. And this cameraman on that was Denny Ailing on all the effects. And we'd walk around, and I'd literally have him just on with the lights, pulling the lights around, and then just stand there and say, stop. And then he'd come in and look at it, and Denny'd say, okay, it's too much here, here's too much, we've got to fill. So I always hated filling, because I wanted to be really harsh. But Denny would always force me into filling. So we got to do a cover shot.
Initially, Ridley sort of viewed him with total and utter suspicion, but because he was actually a really good craftsman, he actually knew his job inside out, I think actually Ridley came to be rather fond of him.
what was cutting edge, which was actually we did not use, was motion control. And we didn't use it simply because the budget didn't allow us all that time to do stop motion photography. So we developed a camera which moved very slowly on a drive mechanism, but we didn't actually repeat moves as such, because at the time the shots that were written in the actual script made it possible for us to do just regular model work with a high degree of professionalism and extremely wide-angle lenses.
Some of these shots, like the planet shots, that was that very painful process whereby the camera moves one tiny frame per second or something like that. And so I remember really wasn't happy over a week with what we were getting from it. So Ridley went in and shot it himself. And he said, put some smoke in there. And they said, we can't do that. The camera moves too slowly. The smoke is going to look, put it in, And he did it, and it worked. Looked great.
Because it wasn't on motion control pads, it was just operated. It was just physically operated. And that because of that, I mostly kept the Nostromo close. So I didn't have to have stars and universe. So that's all just live shooting with a wind machine and a lot of smoke. And of course people say there is no atmosphere in space. I said there is now, mate. To make it work, I had no other way of doing it. I wouldn't have had any sense of movement because I couldn't afford big galaxy shots of it.
Working with Ridley Scott was quite an experience. It was nice to work directly with the director, with nobody in between, having a one-to-one relationship where I would go into a room, do a little drawing and show it to him, like of the clamp arm. It was nice that he would actually listen to me. I mean, I wasn't anybody really, I suppose, and it was just great to have him actually consider your opinion as well, but then come along and sort of say, right, but I want it done this way.
When you've got somebody like Ridley who's very precise about what he wants in a general term, except he keeps changing his mind and building on things. He doesn't go from one thing to another. He just expands and expands and expands. And so like on Nostromo, that started off as a small sort of model, and then it grew, bits, pieces everywhere. Ron Cobb had done the original design, and then Ridley added bits to it. He kept saying, oh, let's put a bit on here and put a bit on there, because we were trying to build a large one, a large-scale one, which was about 10 or 12 feet. And it kept growing and growing and growing, and I think it wound up being about 16, 17 feet in the end.
Well, the biggest challenge has got to be the fact that Ridley Scott wanted things changed, but he would want to shoot on a model very, very short time after he decided to make radical changes. An example of this would be that we had a very, very cathedral-like refinery, which I'd done a large amount of the work on. He was very much into the sort of spire look, this kind of church spire type Gothic look. What he then did was he decided that he wanted a much chunkier looking refinery, so he would basically attack this thing with a hammer and chisel. And if you imagine you spent say 6-8 weeks working on a section, and suddenly he would literally pick up a mallet and a 1-inch chisel, bang, like this, and you'd see bits flying off all over the place. And so the challenge was he'd then turn around and say, right, after lunch I want to shoot on it, and I want that bit like this and that bit like that. And you're thinking, oh, we just spent 6 weeks doing that bit, and you want the shoot on this after lunch. So one of the biggest challenges was getting the model looking good quick enough for him to shoot on it.